Grace Thompson hadn't eaten in 36 hours when she stumbled upon what the Oregon State Police would later call the most valuable crime scene in the forest. The dying German Shepherd tied to the oak tree would have been worth $50,000 alive, but to the starving 12-year-old orphan, he was worth infinitely more. 3 months later, a hidden microchip would reveal a truth that shattered 3 lives and rebuilt them into something extraordinary. But on that September afternoon, all Grace knew was that something beautiful was dying alone, and she, who knew that particular agony intimately, couldn't walk away. The massive dog's amber eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stopped her cold, her foraged berries scattering across the pine needles. Those eyes held recognition, impossible, haunting recognition that made her scarred wrists ache with phantom pain. Behind her, a branch snapped. The forest held its breath. Whoever had done this might still be watching. Time was bleeding out as surely as the dog's infected wounds. Who would torture such a magnificent creature? And why did looking into his eyes feel like coming home? Pine Ridge Children's Home squatted at the edge of the Cascade Range like a forgotten gray toad, its peeling paint and sagging roof a testament to Oregon's endless rain and the state's endless indifference. For 7 years it had been Grace Thompson's entire world, a world measured in missed meals, locked closets, and the kind of casual cruelty that adults perfected when they thought no one important was watching. At 12, Grace had learned to make herself invisible. She was small for her age, a deliberate adaptation to survive on scraps. Her dark hair hung limp around a face that had learned not to ask for seconds, not to complain when Margaret Sullivan, the home's director, pocketed the food money and served them watered-down soup and stale bread. The other 23 children called her Ghost because of how she could slip through the halls unnoticed, but also because of the haunted look that never quite left her eyes. The rope scars on her wrists told their own story. Punishment for defending 6-year-old Tommy from the older boys. 3 days tied in the basement storage room with nothing but her mother's wedding ring on its chain for comfort. That ring was her only inheritance, the sole proof that someone had once loved her enough to make promises. Sarah Thompson had died when Grace was 5, or so Margaret had told her, killed in a car accident that had somehow left no records, no gravesite, no goodbye. The forest had become her sanctuary. While other children feared the towering Douglas firs and the stories of bears and mountain lions, Grace found peace in the ancient quiet. She knew every deer trail within 3 miles, every stream where crawdads hid, every patch where morel mushrooms grew after rain. The forest fed her when the home wouldn't, sheltered her when the walls became too close, and asked nothing in return but respect. Margaret Sullivan ruled Pine Ridge with the kind of bitter efficiency that came from personal disappointment fermented over decades. At 65, she wore her gray hair in the same severe bun she'd adopted 30 years ago when her own daughter Emma had vanished. Kidnapped, the police said. Probably dead, they didn't say, but implied with their pitying looks. That loss had curdled her heart like old milk, transforming grief into something harder and meaner. If she couldn't save her own child, why should these throwaway kids expect more than the bare minimum? The children learned to recognize her moods by the click of her orthopedic shoes on the cracked linoleum. Sharp staccatos meant someone would go hungry. Slow, deliberate steps meant the closet, or worse. Grace had cataloged every pattern, every warning sign, the way a deer learned to read the wind. That September afternoon, Grace had slipped through her secret gap in the chain-link fence with the practiced ease of a wild thing returning to its true home. The forest welcomed her with the smell of pine resin and damp earth, the promise of chanterelles and blackberries, and, unknowingly, an encounter that would shatter the careful armor she'd built around her heart. The whimpering came from the direction of Devil's Drop, a limestone cliff that local teens used for illegal parties and that Grace usually avoided. But something in that sound, so raw, so desperately hopeless, pulled at her like a fishhook in her chest. She'd heard that kind of suffering before, usually at 2 in the morning when new kids arrived at Pine Ridge and realized their parents weren't coming back. Grace pushed through a tangle of salmonberry bushes, their thorns catching at her threadbare jacket. The whimpers grew louder, punctuated by labored breathing that made her stomach clench. Then she saw him. The German Shepherd was massive even in his depleted state. Someone had tied him to an ancient oak with what looked like marine-grade rope, the blue and white kind she'd seen on fishing boats at the harbor. The rope wrapped around his chest and front legs in a complex pattern that spoke of deliberate cruelty, pulled so tight it had cut through his coat into the flesh beneath. Dark stains on the ground told her he'd been here for days, maybe longer, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Amber like autumn honey, they held an intelligence that seemed almost human in its depth of suffering. When those eyes found hers, something electric passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but something deeper. A shared understanding of what it meant to be abandoned, to be bound by circumstances beyond your control, to endure because the alternative was unthinkable. "Oh God," Grace whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. The dog's tail attempted a weak wag, just the barest movement, but it was enough to break her heart. Up close, she could see the full extent of his torture. Infected wounds wept where the rope had cut deepest. His ribs showed stark beneath matted fur. Dehydration had sunken his eyes, but they remained fixed on her with desperate hope. Grace's hand shook as she reached into her pocket, pulling out the treasure she'd been saving. Half a peanut butter sandwich she'd hidden from breakfast, wrapped in a napkin already gray from reuse. She'd planned to give it to Tommy, who was only 3, and cried from hunger more than the rest. But looking at this magnificent creature reduced to begging with his eyes, she knew Tommy would understand. "Here," she whispered, holding the sandwich close to his mouth. "It's not much, but it's all I have." The dog's nostrils flared, and for a moment pride seemed to war with hunger in those remarkable eyes. Then, with infinite gentleness that belied his size and suffering, he took the sandwich from her fingers. His teeth never touched her skin, careful even in starvation. He ate slowly, as if savoring not just the food but the kindness behind it. While he ate, Grace examined the ropes. They were tied with sailor's knots, bowlines and clove hitches she recognized from a library book on sailing she'd once hidden under her mattress. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random cruelty. This was professional. "I'm going to get you out," she promised, pulling out the small folding knife she used for mushroom hunting. Margaret would beat her senseless if she knew Grace had it, but some risks were worth taking. "This might hurt. I'm sorry." The dog finished the sandwich and did something that would stay with Grace forever. Despite his pain, despite having every reason to distrust humans, he deliberately relaxed his massive body and laid his head on the ground, exposing his neck and the worst of the rope burns. It was complete surrender, absolute trust from a creature who had been given every reason never to trust again. Grace's vision blurred with tears as she began cutting. The rope was thick, her knife small and dull. Every strand took effort, and she had to be careful not to cut too close to his wounds. The dog never moved, never complained, though she could feel his muscles trembling with pain. Occasionally his tail would give the faintest wag when she spoke to him, as if her voice alone brought comfort. "You're so brave," she murmured, sawing at a particularly thick section. "Braver than me. I would have given up by now. But you didn't, did you? You waited. You knew someone would come." It took over an hour. The sun had begun its descent toward the Pacific, painting the forest in shades of gold and shadow. Grace's hands cramped and blistered, but she didn't stop. When the last rope finally fell away, the German Shepherd tried to stand. His legs buckled immediately. Days of being bound had cut off circulation, and malnutrition had stolen his strength. He collapsed with a soft whine of frustration that was somehow more heartbreaking than any cry of pain would have been. "It's okay," Grace soothed, running her hand along his matted fur. "You don't have to be strong right now. I've got you." That's when she noticed the collar hidden beneath the ropes around his neck. It was expensive-looking leather with some kind of electronic device attached. A black box about the size of a matchbook with a small LED light that blinked red every few seconds. Grace's street-smart instincts kicked in immediately. If someone was tracking this dog, they might be coming back. She unbuckled the collar with fumbling fingers and shoved it deep in her jacket pocket. Whatever technology it contained, whoever was looking for this dog, she didn't want them finding him until she knew he was safe. The problem now was getting him back to Pine Ridge. The dog had to weigh at least 90 pounds, and the shed where she planned to hide him was 2 miles through rough forest. But Grace had learned long ago that when you had no good options, you made do with what you had. Using her jacket and some fallen branches, she fashioned a crude travois. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would work. The dog watched her preparations with those intelligent eyes, and when she was ready, he used what little strength he had to help position himself on the makeshift sled. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Grace said, gripping the branches and beginning to pull. "The throwaway kid and the throwaway dog. But you know what? Trash only stays trash if nobody bothers to look closer." The journey back was a blur of effort and determination. Grace's malnourished body protested every step, but she'd endured worse. Every time she wanted to stop, she'd look back at the dog, at how he kept his weight as centered as possible to make pulling easier, at how, even in his weakness, he was trying to help, and find the strength for a few more yards. By the time they reached the abandoned groundskeeper's shed behind Pine Ridge, full darkness had fallen. Grace's muscles screamed, her hands bled from rope burns to match the dog's wounds, but they'd made it. As she settled him onto a bed of old tarps and her own thin jacket, the German Shepherd reached out with one massive paw and gently touched her arm. In that touch was a promise. "I won't forget this. I won't forget you." Grace collapsed beside him, exhausted but somehow more hopeful than she'd been in years. "Tomorrow I'll get you food and medicine," she whispered. "I'll make you better. I promise." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the Oregon night pressed against the shed's broken windows, but inside, two lost souls had found each other. And sometimes, Grace thought as sleep began to claim her, that was how all the best stories began. 3 months had transformed both of them. The German Shepherd Grace had named Shadow for how his eyes followed her every movement, now stood proud and healthy, his coat gleaming like polished mahogany in the afternoon light filtering through the shed's broken window. The wounds had healed into thin scars hidden beneath thick fur, and the ribs no longer showed. But it was the change in his eyes that marked the true transformation. Where once there had been resignation, now there was purpose. Grace ran her fingers through his fur, marveling as always at its softness. She'd spent hours brushing out the mats, washing away months of neglect with water carried in stolen buckets. Shadow had endured it all with patient dignity, only showing excitement when she appeared each dawn and twilight with food scrounged from the orphanage kitchen or foraged from the forest. "You're getting spoiled," she murmured, as Shadow performed his latest trick, balancing a pine cone on his nose until she gave the signal. It had taken only 3 attempts to teach him. His intelligence continued to astound her. Sometimes she wondered what kind of training he'd had before. The way he responded to German commands she'd learned from an old library book, The way he positioned himself at the door during every visit, the way he could differentiate between footsteps outside, friendly versus threatening, spoke of extensive education. That morning, as Grace groomed him with a brush she'd found in a dumpster, her fingers encountered something she'd noticed before but ignored: a small, hard lump beneath the skin at the base of his neck. Today, curiosity finally won. She parted the fur carefully, and there it was, a tiny surgical scar, nearly invisible. "What's this, boy?" she asked. Shadow turned his great head to watch as she probed gently. The lump was about the size of a rice grain, clearly artificial. Grace had seen enough television through the home's broken set to recognize what it might be: a microchip. Her hand stilled. A microchip meant Shadow wasn't abandoned. He was lost, or stolen. The walk to the public library took 40 minutes, but Margaret was at her weekly casino trip, using funds meant for the children's winter clothes, no doubt, and wouldn't notice Grace's absence. Shadow had whined when she left, but she'd given him the hand signal for stay, and he'd obeyed, though his eyes had followed her with an expression that made her chest tight. The Cascade Public Library was a haven Grace had discovered years ago. Mrs. Chen, the elderly librarian, never asked why a 12-year-old spent hours reading everything from medical texts to sailing manuals. Today, Grace headed straight for the public computers. Her fingers trembled as she typed, "Microchip Dog Scanner, Oregon." The results led her to a pet recovery database. Without the chip number, she couldn't search directly, but she tried another approach. "Missing German Shepherd, Oregon reward." The third result made her stomach drop. "Missing Max, $1,000 reward." The photo showed Shadow, unmistakably him, though healthier and wearing an expensive leather collar. The article was dated 6 months ago. Beloved companion of tech billionaire William Harrison missing since March. Max, a 7-year-old German Shepherd valued at $50,000, disappeared from Harrison's Cascade County estate. The extensively trained protection and therapy dog was last seen wearing a GPS collar. Harrison, founder of Harrison Dynamics, has posted a $1 million reward for Max's safe return. "He's not just a pet," Harrison stated. "He's family. He's all I have left." Grace stared at the screen, her mind racing. $1 million. More money than she could conceive of. Enough to escape Pine Ridge forever, to never be hungry again, to help the other kids. But then she read on, and her blood chilled. Police suspect professional theft. 2 similar purebred dogs have been found dead in Oregon forests this year after ransom demands went unmet. Authorities warn that Max may meet the same fate if not found soon. Another link led to a more recent article: Harrison hospitalized with heart failure. The photo showed an elderly man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looking frailer than his 72 years. Something about those eyes seemed familiar, but Grace couldn't place it. She memorized the phone number from Max's missing poster and cleared the browser history, a habit born of survival. The walk back to Pine Ridge felt longer, her mind churning. Max. His name was Max, and someone out there was desperate to find him. When she reached the shed, Max was exactly where she'd left him, but his whole body vibrated with joy at her return. He pressed against her legs, and she sank down beside him, burying her face in his fur. "Your name is Max," she whispered, "and you're worth $1 million. But you know what? I don't care. You're worth more than that to me." Max, she'd have to get used to calling him that, licked her face with gentle swipes of his tongue, as if he understood, as if he was saying, "I choose you too." That night, Grace barely slept. The phone number ran through her head like a song she couldn't forget. She thought about Mr. Harrison, alone and sick, missing his dog. She thought about the $1,000,000. She thought about Margaret's cruelty, about little Tommy's hunger, about all the ways money could change everything. But mostly, she thought about trust, about how Max had trusted her with his life, had chosen to live when he could have given up. How could she sell that trust, even for $1,000,000? The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Grace arrived at the shed to find Margaret standing outside, her face purple with rage. "You stupid, stupid girl," Margaret hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Grace's heart hammered, but she kept her face blank. Another survival skill. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me!" Margaret grabbed Grace's arm, nails digging in. "I know about the dog. I've known for a week, and I know who he belongs to." The words hit Grace like cold water. "How?" "Because I hired the man who took him." Margaret's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Marcus Chen. He owed me money from gambling debts. I told him to take Harrison's precious dog to make that bastard suffer like I've suffered." Grace's mind reeled. "Why? What did Mr. Harrison ever do to you?" Margaret's face contorted. "What did he do? His company killed my sister." "Your mother worked for Harrison Dynamics, did you know that? The stress, the long hours, the impossible deadlines, they drove her to suicide. Sarah killed herself because of William Harrison, and you're protecting his dog?" The world tilted. "My mother. You said she died in a car accident. I lied. She threw herself off Devil's Drop when you were 5. Left a note saying she couldn't take it anymore, couldn't provide for you, couldn't live with her failures." Margaret's grip tightened. "I took you in out of guilt. My own daughter, Emma, had been taken from me, kidnapped when she was your age. I thought saving you would. But you're just like your mother. Weak. Pathetic." Grace wrenched free, stumbling backward. Behind the shed door, Max began to growl, low, menacing, protective. "You have 2 choices," Margaret continued. "Give me the dog so I can finish what Marcus started, or I'll call animal control and have it destroyed as a dangerous stray. Then I'll make sure you spend the next 6 years locked in the basement. No more forest, no more freedom, nothing. You can't—" "I can do whatever I want. Who's going to stop me? Who's going to believe the throwaway daughter of a suicide over a grieving woman who's run this home for 20 years? Margaret turned on her heel. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. The dog dies either way, but you get to choose whether you suffer with it." As her footsteps faded, Grace sank to the ground. Max nosed open the shed door. He'd learned the trick weeks ago and pressed against her, whining softly. "She's my aunt," Grace whispered, the truth settling like stones in her stomach. "My mother's sister, and she hates me for being alive when her daughter isn't." Max licked the tears she hadn't realized were falling. In his amber eyes she saw her own reflection, lost, betrayed, but not broken. Not yet. Grace made her decision then, in the dirt outside a broken shed, with $1,000,000 dog leaning against her and the weight of truth crushing her chest. She would call William Harrison, not for the money, not for revenge against Margaret, but because Max deserved to go home, because somewhere an old man was dying of a broken heart, because sometimes the right choice was the one that hurt the most. "Tomorrow," she promised Max, pulling out the collar she'd hidden for 3 months. "Tomorrow, we find out who you really are. And maybe who I am too." Max's tail thumped once against the ground. In the distance, thunder rolled across the Cascades, promising a storm. But for now, girl and dog sat together in the gathering dusk, preparing for a revelation that would shatter 3 lives and rebuild them into something none of them expected. The phone number burned in Grace's memory. 503-555-0147. 7 digits. that would change everything. She just had to find the courage to dial them. The payphone outside the Cascade County General Store had seen better days. Its plastic shell was cracked, covered in graffiti and rust. But it still worked. Grace had tested it once before when she'd almost called Child Protective Services on Margaret. At 2 in the morning, Main Street was deserted except for the occasional semi-truck rumbling toward Portland. Grace had slipped out through her dormitory window, leaving pillows arranged to look like her sleeping form, and run the 3 miles in darkness. Max had followed her despite her commands to stay. She'd given up trying to make him return to the shed when she realized he was limping, favoring his left front paw, where the rope scars were deepest. They couldn't afford to aggravate old wounds, not now. Her hands shook as she lifted the receiver. The coins she'd collected over months, pennies from sidewalks, nickels from the library's fountain when she cleaned it for Mrs. Chen, clinked as she fed them into the slot. Each metallic sound felt like a heartbeat. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Harrison residence? The voice was male, elderly, tired. Is this Mr. William Harrison? A pause. Then, with sudden alertness, yes. Who is this? Grace's throat closed. Beside her, Max whined softly, pressing against her legs. She looked down at him, at those amber eyes that had trusted her completely, and found her voice. My name is Grace Thompson, sir. I found your dog, Max. The silence lasted so long she wondered if the connection had been lost. Then she heard it, a sound that broke her 12-year-old heart. A grown man trying not to cry. Max? The word came out cracked, desperate. Is he alive? Please, is he okay? He's alive, Grace said quickly. He was hurt really bad when I found him 3 months ago, tied to a tree in the forest. But he's better now. He's such a good dog, Mr. Harrison. The best dog. 3 months. The man's voice shook. You've had him for 3 months? I'm sorry. I didn't know who he belonged to at first, and then I was scared. The people who took him might come back, and I couldn't let them hurt him again. Where are you? Urgency colored every word. I'll come immediately. I'll bring whatever you need, the reward money, medical care for Max, anything. Just please tell me where you are. Grace gave him the address of Pine Ridge, then added something she hadn't planned to say. Mr. Harrison, you should know, whoever took him tied him up with boat rope and left him to die. He has scars, but he's still the same sweet dog. He's still Max. This time William Harrison didn't try to hide his tears. Thank you, he said. Thank you for saving him. What's your name again? Grace Thompson, sir. Another pause. Thompson? What was your mother's name? Something cold walked down Grace's spine. Sarah. But she died when I was 5. The sharp intake of breath on the other end made Max's ears prick forward. Sarah Thompson from Accounts Receivable? She had a daughter? You knew my mother? I'll be there in an hour, Harrison said, his voice strange now, layered with something Grace couldn't identify. Don't go anywhere, please. And Grace, keep Max safe. The line went dead. Grace stood holding the receiver, wondering what she'd just set in motion. Max nudged her hand with his great head, and she hung up the phone. He's coming, she told Max. Your dad is coming to get you. The walk back to Pine Ridge took longer, Max's limp more pronounced. Grace stopped frequently, letting him rest, her mind spinning. Harrison had known her mother. The way he'd said her name, like it hurt. They were a half-mile from the orphanage when headlights swept across them. Grace's heart seized. Margaret had discovered her absence. Or worse, Marcus Chen had been watching. But the car that pulled up wasn't Margaret's rust-eaten sedan. It was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. The rear door opened and a man stepped out. Grace recognized him from the news articles, though he looked frailer in person. William Harrison was tall but stooped, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight to illness. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and something else, a desperate hope that made him look younger and older simultaneously. He took one look at Max and fell to his knees right there on the asphalt. "Max!" The name came out as a prayer. What happened next would stay with Grace forever. Max, who had been limping moments before, suddenly found strength. His whole body vibrated with joy as he closed the distance between them, not running but moving with deliberate purpose. He didn't jump on the old man, somehow understanding fragility when he saw it. Instead, he pressed his great head against Harrison's chest and stood perfectly still while the billionaire wrapped arms around him and sobbed. "My boy," Harrison whispered into Max's fur. "My good boy. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let them take you." Grace stood frozen, watching the reunion with a mixture of joy and devastating loss. This was right. This was where Max belonged. But knowing that didn't stop her heart from breaking. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, Harrison looked up at her. His eyes, there was definitely something familiar about them. "You're Grace," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, suddenly aware of her threadbare clothes, her tangled hair, the fact that she was a nobody who'd been playing with a millionaire's dog. Harrison struggled to his feet, Max plastered to his side. "You saved him." "He saved himself," Grace said. "I just cut the ropes." "Show me." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Show me where you've been keeping him. I need to understand." The ride back to Pine Ridge in the SUV felt surreal. Grace sat in leather seats that probably cost more than the orphanage's annual food budget, while Max positioned himself between her and Harrison, his head on her lap, his body pressed against his owner's legs, trying to keep them both. "How did you know my mother?" Grace asked as they neared the orphanage. Harrison was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She worked for me. Brilliant woman, kind. She had a way of making everyone around her feel valued." He paused. "I didn't know she had a daughter. She died when I was 5. Car accident." Harrison's hands clenched in Max's fur. "Is that what they told you?" Before Grace could respond, they'd arrived. Pine Ridge looked even shabbier in the SUV's headlights. Harrison stared at the building with an expression Grace couldn't read. "You live here?" "For 7 years." "And the shed?" Grace led them around back, Max walking between them like a bridge. The shed that had been her and Max's sanctuary looked pathetic now. Broken windows stuffed with rags, walls listing to one side, door hanging on one hinge. Harrison stood in the doorway, taking in the makeshift bed, the water bowls she'd stolen from the kitchen, the small pile of dog toys she'd made from socks and rope. His gaze lingered on the corner where she'd scratched Grace plus Shadow, Eagle's family, into the wood. "You kept him here. For 3 months." "It was the best I could do." Grace lifted her chin, defensive. "He was safe. He was loved." "I can see that." Harrison's voice was thick. He turned to her, and in the moonlight she could see tears on his cheeks. "You shared what little you had with him. You risked punishment to keep him secret. You could have claimed the reward immediately, but you didn't." "Why?" Grace looked at Max, who gazed back with those knowing amber eyes. "Because he trusted me, and nobody," her voice cracked, "nobody ever trusted me before." Harrison made a sound like he'd been punched. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. "The reward, as promised." Grace stared at the money, more than she'd ever seen, more than she could comprehend. Slowly she shook her head. "I don't want it." "Grace, I didn't save him for money. I saved him because it was right, because he deserved better than dying alone and scared. The words tumbled out, years of hurt and hope tangled together. I know what that feels like. Being thrown away, being forgotten. I couldn't walk past him any more than I could walk past Tommy when the big kids steal his food, or Anna when she cries at night for parents who sold her for drug money. Harrison stared at her. How old are you? 12. 12? He repeated it like a foreign word. When I was 12, I was worried about baseball cards and bicycle races. You're worried about survival. Someone has to worry, Grace said simply. The adults sure don't. A car door slammed. Margaret's voice cut through the night. What the hell is going on here? She rounded the corner and stopped dead at the sight of Harrison. Her face went white, then red, then purple with rage. You! She spat. How dare you come here? Ms. Sullivan. Harrison's voice could have frozen fire. I understand you run this establishment. Get off my property. Your property? Harrison looked around with deliberate slowness. According to state records, Pine Ridge Children's Home is owned by the Oregon Department of Human Services. You're merely an employee who's been embezzling funds meant for these children's care. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't prove. I can, actually. Just as I can prove you hired Marcus Chen to kidnap my dog. Harrison's smile was sharp as winter. He's already in custody, by the way. Picked up an hour ago. He was quite talkative when offered a deal. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Then you won't mind explaining why you paid him $5,000, money stolen from the food budget, to kidnap Max? Grace stepped forward. Wait. She hired someone to hurt Max? Harrison's eyes never left Margaret's face. Your aunt has harbored a grudge against me for 12 years. She blames me for your mother's death. The words hit Grace like physical blows. Aunt, mother's death. 12 years. My mother killed herself, Grace said numbly. Margaret told me. She jumped from Devil's Drop because she couldn't handle the stress of her job at your company. Your mother never worked for my company, Harrison said quietly. She was my fiancée. The world tilted. Grace reached out blindly, and Max was there, solid and warm, holding her up. You're lying, Margaret shrieked. Sarah was a good girl until you corrupted her, got her pregnant, and then abandoned her when she needed you most. I didn't know she was pregnant. Harrison's control finally cracked. She never told me. Her family, your family, said she'd moved away, started fresh. It wasn't until she died that I learned the truth, and by then you'd all told me Grace died with her in the accident. What accident? Grace's voice sounded strange to her own ears. She jumped. You said she jumped. Margaret's face contorted. She did. But we told everyone it was a car accident. Less shameful. And we told him, she jabbed a finger at Harrison, that you'd died too. Better to let him think you were both gone than let him destroy you like he destroyed her. So you kept her. Harrison's voice was deadly soft. You kept my daughter in this hellhole, let her starve and suffer out of spite? Daughter. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Grace looked between them, at Margaret's twisted fury, at Harrison's dawning horror, at Max sitting perfectly still between them all like a guardian. No, Grace whispered. That's not... I can't be... But even as she denied it, pieces clicked into place. Harrison's eyes, she had those same eyes. The way Max had trusted her instantly, recognized her. The wedding ring she wore on a chain, her mother's ring that Margaret had saved for her. Harrison reached into his wallet with shaking hands and pulled out a photograph, faded, creased from years of handling. It showed a younger him with a beautiful woman who had Grace's dark hair and smile. Between them sat a German shepherd puppy. That's Guardian, Harrison said hoarsely. Max's grandmother. I gave her to your mother when we got engaged. And when you were born, he had to stop, compose himself. When you were born, I had Guardian's son trained specially to protect you, to always find you, no matter what. Grace took the photo with numb fingers. The woman, her mother, looked so happy, so alive, nothing like the broken person Margaret had described. You threw us away, Margaret spat. When Sarah told our parents she was pregnant, you disappeared, changed your phone number, had security throw her out when she came to your office. I was in Japan for 6 months, establishing the Asian division, Harrison said quietly. By the time I returned, your parents told me Sarah had married someone else and moved to California. They showed me wedding photos, doctored, I realized later, said she wanted no contact. I tried to respect her wishes. Liar! I have the emails. The letters returned unopened. The private investigator reports saying she died in a car accident with her daughter. Harrison's voice broke. I mourned you both. I never married, never had other children, because losing you destroyed something in me. And all this time. He looked at Grace like she was a miracle and a tragedy combined. All this time you were here, suffering, alone, and I didn't know. Max moved then. He walked to Harrison, touched his hand with his nose. Then he walked to Grace, did the same, back and forth, connecting them, until finally he sat between them and barked once, sharp, decisive. Even he knows, Harrison said wonderingly. He found you when I couldn't. My last gift to Sarah. And he found you. This is very touching, Margaret sneered, but it changes nothing. You can't prove she's your daughter, and even if you could, I'm her legal guardian. You abandoned her. No court will— Actually, a new voice interrupted. They will. A woman in a severe suit stepped around the corner, followed by 2 police officers. Dana Reeves, Department of Child Protective Services. We received some interesting information about Pine Ridge recently, financial irregularities, reports of abuse, and now kidnapping and fraud. Margaret tried to run. She made it 3 steps before one of the officers caught her. Margaret Sullivan, you're under arrest for embezzlement, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As they led Margaret away, she turned back, her face twisted with hate. Your mother was weak, she spat at Grace. Just like you. Blood always tells. Grace felt something break inside her, not her heart. That had been broken and mended too many times to count, but some last thread of connection to the woman who'd raised her with cruelty disguised as duty. You're wrong, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. My mother was strong enough to love someone completely. You were too broken by your own loss to see it. I'm sorry your daughter was taken from you. But that didn't give you the right to take me from my father. Margaret's face crumpled. For just a moment, Grace saw past the bitterness to the grieving mother underneath. Then the moment passed and the police led her away. Silence fell over the small group. Grace stood between her father, and the dog who'd brought them together, not knowing what came next. Grace, Harrison said softly, I know this is a shock. I know you don't know me, have no reason to trust me, but if you're willing, I'd like the chance to be your father. The chance I should have had 12 years ago. Grace looked at Max. He gazed back, tail wagging slightly, and she could almost hear his thoughts. This is why I waited. This is why I survived. To bring you home. I don't know how to be a daughter, Grace admitted. I don't know how to live in a house with 47 rooms or wear nice clothes or trust that food will always be there. I don't know how to be a father, Harrison replied. I don't know how to help a traumatized 12-year-old or undo years of damage I didn't even know was happening. But maybe we can learn together. Grace thought about the shed, about stolen food and locked closets. She thought about Tommy and Anna and all the other forgotten children. She thought about her mother who'd loved fully and paid the ultimate price. Then she looked at Max, who'd chosen to trust her in his darkest moment, who'd waited 12 years to fulfill his purpose. "Okay," she said, "but on one condition. Anything. The other kids here, they need help too. Real help. Not just a new director who might be as bad as Margaret." Harrison smiled, and for the first time Grace could see herself in that expression. "How about we turn this place into something better? A place where no child goes hungry or feels thrown away. You'd do that?" "Grace, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've been looking for a purpose, a way to honor your mother's memory. What better way than ensuring no child suffers what you've suffered?" Max barked, tail wagging furiously now. He knew somehow that his job was almost done. He'd brought them together. The rest was up to them. "There's one more thing," the social worker said. "Mr. Harrison, the DNA test you ordered months ago when Max first disappeared. We ran Grace's DNA from a hair sample in the shed. She's definitely your daughter." Harrison closed his eyes. "I knew. The moment I saw her, I knew. She has Sarah's kindness and my stubbornness. And Max's heart," Grace added, running her fingers through the dog's fur. "Yes," Harrison agreed. "That too." As dawn broke over the Cascades, painting the sky in shades of hope, Grace stood between her father and her dog, her family, and felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt found. The helicopter cut through the morning sky like a black knife, carrying Grace toward a life she couldn't imagine. She pressed her face against the window, watching Pine Ridge shrink below, while Max lay with his head on her lap, occasionally licking her trembling hands. Harrison sat across from them, breathing from a portable oxygen tank, his eyes never leaving Grace's face, as if she might disappear if he blinked. "Your mother loved helicopters," he said softly. "Said they made her feel like she could escape anything." Grace didn't respond. Everything was happening too fast. 3 hours ago, she'd been an orphan stealing food. Now she was sitting in a millionaire's helicopter wearing a borrowed jacket that probably cost more than Pine Ridge's monthly budget. The social worker had expedited emergency custody papers, promising a full investigation of the home. The other children had watched from windows as she left, their faces mixing hope and envy. "I should have said goodbye to Tommy," Grace murmured. "He won't understand where I went." "We'll go back," Harrison promised. "As soon as the new facility is ready, we'll go back for all of them." The helicopter began its descent, and Grace saw Harrison's estate for the first time. The massive house sprawled across manicured grounds like something from a fairy tale, all glass and stone and impossible angles. But it was the small building beside it that made her breath catch. A kennel complex complete with training grounds and what looked like a veterinary clinic. "Max has his own house?" she asked. "Had," Harrison corrected gently. "He rarely used it after—" He trailed off, then started again. "I built it for the breeding program. Max comes from a long line of exceptional dogs, but after I lost you and your mother, I couldn't bear to continue it. Max was the last." As they landed, staff rushed out to greet them. Grace shrank back instinctively, but Max pressed closer, rumbling a warning growl that made everyone step back respectfully. "It's all right," Harrison told them. "Give her time. She's been through enough." The house's interior was worse than the outside, vast spaces filled with priceless art and echoing silence. Grace counted 17 rooms before she stopped, each more overwhelming than the last. Max stayed glued to her side, his presence the only thing keeping her grounded. "This was your nursery," Harrison said, opening a door on the second floor. Grace froze. The room was a time capsule. Soft yellow walls, a crib that had never held a baby, toys still in their packages, and photographs, dozens of them covering one wall. Her mother, pregnant and glowing. Ultrasound images, a younger Harrison painting the room. Guardian, the German shepherd, supervising. "I finished it the week before she was supposed to tell me," he said quietly. "I'd figured out she was pregnant. She couldn't keep anything from me. I was going to propose again, properly this time, with both our families there. But my father had a heart attack and I had to fly to Japan immediately. When I came back, she was gone," Grace finished. "Your grandparents, her parents, they were very religious, traditional. The shame of an unwed daughter, pregnant by a man they saw as too old, too focused on money." Harrison touched one of the photos gently. "They sent her away. Told everyone she'd married someone appropriate and moved to California. By the time I discovered their lies, it was too late." Grace studied the photos, seeing her own features emerging from the blend of her parents. "Why didn't she call you?" "I've asked myself that every day for 12 years. Harrison sank into a rocking chair that had never rocked a baby. "Her journal, the police found it after, said her parents convinced her I'd rejected her. That the security guard who turned her away had been acting on my orders. She believed I'd chosen my company over our family. But Margaret said Margaret lied about many things, though not everything." Harrison's face aged 10 years in that moment. "I did choose wrong, Grace. I chose to go to Japan instead of staying to fix things immediately. I chose to believe her parents instead of fighting harder. Those choices cost me everything." Max padded over to a corner where a dog bed sat, pristine and unused. He sniffed it carefully, then looked back at Grace with those knowing eyes. This had been meant for him all those years ago. A place prepared for a purpose delayed. "Are you dying?" Grace asked suddenly. The oxygen tank, the weight loss, the gray tinge to his skin. She'd seen enough death at Pine Ridge to recognize its approach. Harrison didn't insult her with denial. "Congestive heart failure. My doctors say 3 to 6 months with treatment. Less if I push too hard. And finding me, is that pushing too hard? Finding you is the only reason to keep breathing." He stood with effort, Max immediately moving to his side as if ready to catch him. "Come, let me show you something." He led her to his study, walls lined with books and computers. But it was the other wall that stole her breath, covered in maps, photos, investigation reports. 12 years of searching laid out like a shrine. "Private investigators in 7 states, he explained. "I searched everywhere. Her parents said she might have gone, but they were clever. They told just enough truth, that she'd died, to make the lies believable. If I'd thought to check Oregon foster homes, orphanages..." His voice cracked. Grace traced a finger over a photo of her mother. "She's not dead." Harrison went very still. "What?" "Margaret said she's in a psychiatric facility, Whispering Pines. That she's been there since I was 5. The sound Harrison made was inhuman. Max immediately pressed against him, whining. Harrison sank into his desk chair, fumbling for his heart medication. "Alive," he whispered. "Sarah's alive. Margaret said she doesn't talk, hasn't spoken since she tried to..." Grace couldn't finish. Harrison's hands shook as he reached for his phone. "We have to go to her. Now. Today. Mr. Harrison, Dad..." The word felt foreign on her tongue. "Your doctors said not to push." Damn the doctors. But even as he said it, a coughing fit seized him. Blood spotted his handkerchief when he pulled it away. Grace knelt beside his chair, Max flanking his other side. "She's waited 12 years. She can wait until you're stronger." "Can she? Can any of us?" Harrison gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Grace, I've learned the hard way that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. If Sarah's alive, if there's even a chance she might know us, remember us, then we go," Grace decided. "But we do it smart." You take your medication, use the wheelchair I saw in the hallway, and let Max and me help." Harrison's smile was watery but real, 12 years old and already more sensible than I ever was. The drive to Whispering Pines took 2 hours in Harrison's medical transport van. Grace sat between her father and Max, watching the Oregon landscape blur past. Harrison spent the time telling her about her mother, how they'd met when Sarah audited his company's charity division, how her honesty and compassion had pierced through his workaholic shell. "She made me want to be better," he said. "Not richer or more successful. Just better, kinder, more present." What happened to her parents? My grandparents? Harrison's jaw tightened. "They died in a car accident 7 years ago. Real, this time. They went to their graves letting me believe you both were dead." Grace felt nothing at this news. How could you mourn people you'd never known, who'd thrown you away before you could walk? Whispering Pines looked like what it was, a place where families put broken people they couldn't fix and didn't want to see. The walls were beige, the floors were beige, even the staff wore beige, as if color might disturb the carefully maintained nothing. "Sarah Thompson," Harrison told the receptionist, his voice steady despite the oxygen cannula. "I'm her. I'm William Harrison. This is her daughter, Grace." The receptionist's eyes widened. "Mr. Harrison, but her file says no family." "Her file is wrong. Where is she?" They were led through endless corridors that smelled of industrial cleaning products and despair. Grace's hand found Max's collar, gripping tight. The dog pressed against her, solid and warm and real. "She's in the garden," a nurse explained. "She likes to sit by the fountain, hasn't spoken in 7 years, not since her sister stopped visiting. We've tried everything, therapy, medication, even electroshock before it was banned. Nothing reaches her." They emerged into a small courtyard where patients sat like statues in uncomfortable chairs, and there, by a fountain that barely trickled, sat a woman Grace recognized from photographs but wouldn't have known on the street. Sarah Thompson had been beautiful once. Now she was a ghost, thin to the point of frailty, dark hair shot with premature gray, hazel eyes that stared at nothing. She wore a shapeless hospital gown and slippers, hands folded in her lap like broken birds. "Sarah?" Harrison's voice broke on her name. Nothing, not even a flicker. He wheeled himself closer, Grace and Max following. "Sarah, it's William. I'm here. I'm finally here." Still nothing. Grace felt her heart shatter. This wasn't a mother. This was what remained when hope died. Then Max moved. Slowly, deliberately, he approached Sarah's chair. He sniffed her hands gently, then made a sound Grace had never heard from him, a soft, questioning whine that seemed to reach into the past. Sarah blinked, her head turned slightly. Max sat directly in front of her and lifted one massive paw to rest on her knee, a gesture achingly familiar from old photos. Guardian's signature move, passed down through generations. "Guardian?" The word was less than a whisper, rusty from disuse. "But you're gone. Everyone's gone." "Not Guardian," Harrison said urgently. "His grandson, Max. Sarah, look at me, please." Sarah's eyes struggled to focus, swimming up from whatever depth she'd drowned in. When they found Harrison's face, she flinched as if slapped. "No, you're not real. Nothing's real anymore. I'm real. Grace is real." Harrison gestured for Grace to come closer. "Our daughter, Sarah, she's alive. She's here." Sarah's gaze shifted to Grace, and something seismic happened in those hazel eyes. Recognition? Memory? Or just the cruel trick of a broken mind. "My baby?" Her hand lifted, trembling, toward Grace's face. "But she died. They said she died with me." I didn't die, Grace said, her own voice barely functional. I've been at Pine Ridge. Margaret told me you were dead. She told everyone we both were. Margaret. The name seemed to unlock something in Sarah. My sister. She said William didn't want us, that he paid her to take you away, that I was too sick to be a mother. She lied, Harrison said fiercely. I searched for you both, every day for 12 years. Sarah was crying now, silent tears that seemed surprised to find themselves on her cheeks. I tried to come back, after Devil's Drop, but they said you were gone, adopted, better off without a crazy mother. I was never adopted, Grace said. I was never better off. I was just alone. Not alone, Sarah whispered, her hand finally making contact with Grace's cheek. You had Guardian. Somehow I knew he'd find you. That's why I couldn't let go completely. I had to believe Guardian would protect you like he protected me. Max leaned into Sarah, his whole body radiating the patient love that had kept him alive in the forest, that had brought Grace to him, that had waited 12 years to complete this circle. Mom? Grace tried the word, found it fit better than she'd expected. Can you come home? Sarah looked between them, her daughter, the man she'd loved, the dog that carried the legacy of protection through generations. For the first time in 7 years, something like hope flickered in her eyes. Home, she repeated. Is there still such a place? We'll make one, Harrison promised. All of us, if you'll try. Sarah's hand found Max's head, buried itself in his fur. The dog's tail wagged once, twice. A promise. A beginning. Okay, she whispered. For Grace. For Guardian's grandson. I'll try. As they sat in that bleak courtyard, a broken family held together by a dog's patient love, Grace understood something profound. Sometimes salvation came on 4 legs. Sometimes the lost stayed lost until someone stubborn enough, loyal enough, loving enough refused to give up. Max had never given up. Not when tied to die, not when searching for his family, not when bringing them together across 12 years of lies and loss. If a dog could hold that much faith, maybe humans could learn to do the same. Let's go home, Grace said, the word tasting like honey on her tongue. All of us. Max barked once in agreement, and for the first time in over a decade, Sarah Thompson smiled. The road back from Whispering Pines stretched like a tightrope between past and future. Sarah sat in the back of the medical transport, her fingers never leaving Max's fur, as if he were the only real thing in a world that had betrayed her too often. Grace watched her mother's reflection in the window, the way she flinched at sudden movements, how her lips moved in silent conversations with ghosts only she could see. The release papers will take a few days, Harrison said, coughing into his handkerchief. More blood. More than before. But Dr. Patel says she can come home on supervised visits starting tomorrow. Home. The word sat strange and heavy between them. They were passing through the town center when Sarah suddenly spoke. Stop the car. Sarah? Harrison turned, concerned. Please, just stop. The driver pulled over near a small park. Sarah stared out at the playground where mothers pushed children on swings, and her whole body began to shake. I used to bring Grace here, she whispered, when she was 3, maybe 4. She loved the yellow slide. Her hand pressed against the window. I was a good mother then, wasn't I? You were wonderful, Harrison said firmly. Then why did I try to leave her? The question came out broken, jagged. What kind of mother stands on Devil's Drop and thinks her baby would be better off without her? Grace felt her throat close. This was the question that had haunted her own nights, not why her mother had jumped, but why she hadn't loved Grace enough to stay. A mother who was lied to, Harrison said. Isolated, manipulated by her own family. Sarah, you were sick. Depression isn't a choice or a character flaw. Don't. Sarah's voice turned sharp. Don't make excuses for me. I left my baby. I left her with Margaret, and look what happened. 7 years of hunger and cruelty because I was too weak to fight. Max whined softly, nudging Sarah's hand. She looked down at him, and fresh tears spilled. Even the dog stayed, she said. Tied to a tree, starving, dying, and he held on. But I couldn't. You're here now, Grace said quietly. That's what matters. Sarah turned to really look at her daughter for the first time. You have his eyes, she murmured. But that stubborn set to your mouth, that's all me. God help you. The transport started moving again. As they neared Harrison's estate, Sarah grew increasingly agitated. This is wrong. I don't belong in that house. I never did. Sarah. No, William. Look at me. Really, look. She gestured at herself. The hospital gown, the trembling hands, the eyes that couldn't quite focus. I'm not the woman you fell in love with. That Sarah died on Devil's Drop. What's left is just broken pieces. Then we'll put them back together, Harrison said. You can't fix everything with money and determination, Sarah snapped, then immediately crumbled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, and you're right. Harrison reached for her hand. She let him take it, though her fingers remained limp. I can't fix this, but maybe we can heal together. All of us. When they arrived at the estate, Sarah refused to enter through the main door. The staff entrance, she insisted. I can't. Not the front. Not yet. Grace exchanged worried looks with her father. This wasn't the reunion she'd imagined. This was messier, harder, full of sharp edges that drew blood when touched. In the kitchen, neutral territory, Sarah finally relaxed slightly. She accepted a cup of tea with shaking hands while Max positioned himself at her feet. Tell me about Pine Ridge, she said to Grace. Tell me everything. I need to know what my weakness cost you. So Grace did. She talked about the hunger, the locked closets, the rope burns. She spoke of Tommy and Anna and the other forgotten children. She told her about finding Max, about the months of secret care, about discovering who he really was. With each word, Sarah seemed to shrink. By the time Grace finished, her mother was curled in on herself, keening softly. 7 years, Sarah moaned. 7 years of hell because I gave up. Mom, Grace started, but Sarah cut her off. Don't call me that. I haven't earned it. I don't deserve... She broke off as Max suddenly stood, hackles raised, growling at the kitchen door. A second later it burst open. Marcus Chen stood there, wild-eyed and desperate, a gun shaking in his hand. Where is it? Where's my money? Harrison moved to shield Grace, but his oxygen line tangled, sending him stumbling. Chen, you're supposed to be in custody. I escaped. Wasn't hard. Small-town cops, distracted by all your drama. Marcus's laugh was high, unhinged. You ruined my life, Harrison. Took everything. But I know Margaret had more money hidden, insurance for her retirement. Tell me where it is. I don't know what you're talking about, Harrison wheezed. Liar! Marcus swung the gun toward Grace. Maybe your precious daughter knows. Margaret told me all about her. The throwaway kid who cost $1 million. Everything happened at once. Sarah, who had been catatonic with guilt moments before, erupted from her chair with a sound that was part scream, part war cry. No, not my baby! Never again! Max launched himself at Marcus with lethal precision, 90 pounds of protective fury. The gun went off. Grace felt the bullet whisper past her ear, shattering the window behind her. Max's jaws closed on Marcus's wrist, and the gun spun across the floor. Sarah threw herself on top of Grace, shielding her with her own body, while Harrison grabbed a kitchen knife with surprising speed for a dying man. But it was Max who ended it. He forced Marcus to the ground and held him there, growling low and continuous, until police sirens wailed up the drive. As the officers led Marcus away, his wrist mangled, his escape attempt failed, the four of them sat on the kitchen floor in a tangle of limbs and fur and delayed terror. "You protected me," Grace said to her mother, wonder in her voice. "Instinct," Sarah mumbled, but her arms tightened around her daughter. I saw the gun and thought, I've already failed you so many times." "You didn't fail me just now." Harrison's breathing was labored, his face gray. "We need to talk about security, better locks, alarm system. We need to get you to a hospital," Grace countered, but he waved her off. "Tomorrow, tonight we're together. Finally, that's all that matters." They helped each other stand, Max shepherding them like the guardian he was. Sarah hadn't let go of Grace, and Grace found she didn't mind. Her mother's touch was tentative, as if she was relearning how to be affectionate. But it was real. "I have something for you," Harrison said once they'd settled in the living room. He pulled out a small wooden box. "I've carried this for 12 years. Inside was a ring, not expensive, not flashy, a simple silver band with 3 small stones, an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. Our birthstones," Sarah breathed. "You kept it?" "I bought it the day before I left for Japan. I was going to propose properly when I returned. Make us a real family." His smile was infinitely sad. "I'm 12 years late, and I know you can't, that we aren't. But I wanted you to know. I chose you then. I choose you now. Both of you." Sarah took the ring with trembling fingers, but didn't put it on. "William, I'm not who I was. I may never be her again. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to try. With me, with Grace, with whatever time I have left." "Daddy's dying," Grace said bluntly. When both adults looked at her in shock, she shrugged. "We can't pretend anymore. No more lies, no more secrets. He's dying, you're broken, I'm damaged, and Max is getting old. But we're here, we're together. Isn't that enough to start?" Max barked once in agreement, and despite everything, the trauma, the gun, the years of pain, Sarah laughed. A rusty sound, but real. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured. "All right, we try. No promises, no fairy tales. Just trying." She slipped the ring onto her right hand. Not a wedding ring, not yet, but a promise of possibility. Outside, night settled over Oregon like a blanket. Inside, a family stitched together by tragedy and held by hope sat close. Max at their center, guardian of broken hearts and second chances. It wasn't perfect. Sarah still flinched at shadows. Harrison's cough grew worse by the hour. Grace still hoarded food in her pockets. But they were together, and sometimes that was miracle enough. Tomorrow would bring challenges, medical appointments, therapy sessions, legal battles. But tonight, they had each other and a dog who refused to give up on any of them. It wasn't happily ever after. It was better. It was real. The truth came in fragments over the following days, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. Grace sat in her father's study, surrounded by boxes of evidence the private investigators had compiled, while Max lay across her feet and Harrison dozed in his wheelchair, the oxygen machine keeping rhythm with his labored breathing. "Look at this." Grace held up a folder marked with Margaret's name. Inside were bank statements showing regular deposits, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, all traced back to Pine Ridge's food and clothing budget. She stole over $200,000 in 7 years. Harrison stirred, his eyes focusing with effort. That money was meant for you, for all the children. But that's not the worst part. Grace pulled out another document. These withdrawals, they match the dates. Look. She spread the papers across the desk. Marcus Chen's arrest record, payment schedules, and a name that made Harrison's face drain of color. Emma Sullivan. Margaret's daughter, he whispered. She's alive, Dad. Has been all along. Grace traced the connection with her finger. 30 years ago, Emma was kidnapped. The ransom was $50,000. Margaret paid it, with money she'd embezzled from the first children's home she managed. Dear God. It gets worse. The kidnappers took the money but never returned Emma. They sold her instead. Human trafficking. She escaped when she was 18, has been in witness protection ever since. She's been trying to reach Margaret for years, but Margaret refused all contact. Harrison struggled to sit straighter. Why would she refuse to see her own daughter? Grace found the answer in a letter, Emma's handwriting shaky with emotion. Mom, I understand why you can't face me. The money you stole to save me destroyed other children's lives. How do we live with that? How do I thank you for saving me when the cost was so high? She couldn't face her guilt, Grace said quietly. So she took it out on me, on every child who reminded her of what she'd done. Max suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked. A car was approaching. Grace moved to the window and saw a modest sedan pulling up the drive. A woman emerged, mid-40s, auburn hair shot with premature gray, moving with the careful awareness of someone who'd learned to always check for exits. It's her, Grace breathed. Emma Sullivan. Harrison gripped his oxygen mask. How did she? I called her, Grace admitted. She deserves to know about Margaret, about everything. They met in the living room, an awkward gathering of broken people. Emma's eyes went immediately to Grace, drinking in details with painful intensity. You look like your mother, she said finally. I remember Sarah. She was kind to me the few times we met, before... She gestured helplessly. Before everything fell apart. Why are you here? Harrison's voice was sharp with protective instinct. Emma straightened. Because I owe you answers. All of you. She pulled out a worn notebook. I've spent 20 years investigating my own kidnapping. What I found, it connects to more than just my mother's crimes. She opened the notebook, revealing pages of meticulous notes, connections drawn in different colored inks like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except this conspiracy was real. The man who kidnapped me wasn't working alone. He was part of a ring that targeted wealthy families' children, sometimes for ransom, sometimes for worse. Emma's voice stayed steady, but her knuckles were white. Marcus Chen was part of the same organization. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. What? Different generation, same playbook. They target employees of wealthy families, people with access but also grievances. They exploit financial desperation, personal vendettas. Emma looked directly at Harrison. When Chen worked for your company, he was already being groomed. Your dog was supposed to be practice. Practice for what? But even as Harrison asked, understanding dawned in his eyes. Grace? They were planning to take Grace. Emma nodded grimly. A billionaire's newly discovered daughter. The media attention alone made her a perfect target. Chen botched the dog kidnapping, got arrested. But the organization doesn't give up easily. There are others. Max growled low in his throat, pressing closer to Grace. She buried her fingers in his fur, finding comfort in his solid presence, while her world tilted yet again. "How many others?" Harrison demanded. "I've identified at least 12 operatives on the West Coast. They're patient. They wait years sometimes, embedding themselves in communities, gaining trust." Emma pulled out a photograph. "Recognize him?" Grace gasped. It was Dr. Mitchell, the veterinarian who'd tried to blackmail her. "He's been in Cascade County for 3 years," Emma continued. "Building reputation, waiting for the right opportunity. Chen's arrest spooked them, but they're regrouping." "How do you know all this?" Harrison's question came out strangled. Emma's smile was bitter. "Because I've been hunting them for 20 years. The FBI helped me disappear, but I never stopped looking for the people who stole my childhood. Your family's situation just accelerated my timeline." A knock at the door interrupted them. Max erupted in furious barking, his protective instincts in overdrive. Through the window, Grace saw 2 men in suits, their posture screaming federal agents. "That would be my backup," Emma said calmly. "Mr. Harrison, Grace, we need your help to take down this entire network. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." "No!" Sarah's voice came from the doorway where she'd been listening. She looked fragile but determined, still wearing the ring Harrison had given her on her right hand. "No more running. No more hiding. Mrs. Thompson." "Ms. Thompson," Sarah corrected. "I'm not running anymore. These people took my daughter's childhood because I was too weak to fight. They won't take anything else from this family." She moved to stand beside Grace, her hand finding her daughter's shoulder. The touch was light, still uncertain, but it was there. "What do you need from us?" Harrison asked Emma. "Everything. Financial records, security footage, any interactions with Mitchell or others who might be connected. And," Emma hesitated, "we need bait." "Absolutely not," Harrison and Sarah said in unison. "Not Grace," Emma clarified quickly. "Max." The German shepherd's ears perked at his name. "They still want him," Emma explained. "Not for money now, but for revenge. Chen's arrest, the failed kidnapping, it made them look weak. They need to save face within the organization. If we make it seem like Max is vulnerable." "You want to use my dog as bait?" Grace's voice rose with indignation. "With full FBI protection. Controlled circumstances." Emma leaned forward. "Grace, these people won't stop. Not until they're caught, or until they succeed in hurting your family. This is our chance to end it." Grace looked at Max, who gazed back with those amber eyes that had seen so much. He'd already survived one kidnapping, had already been bait whether they'd planned it or not. Could she ask him to do it again? As if reading her thoughts, Max stood and walked to Emma. He sat directly in front of her and offered his paw, the same gesture he'd made with Sarah at Whispering Pines. Trust, freely given. "Even the dog has more courage than I do," Sarah murmured. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Harrison said softly. "It's acting despite the fear. And you're here, Sarah. That takes more courage than you know." The FBI agents entered then, all efficiency and protocol. They swept the house for bugs, checked security systems, and began setting up what they called a protective perimeter. Grace watched it all with Max pressed against her side, trying to reconcile this new reality with the simple life she'd known just days ago. "There's something else," Emma said once the agents had finished their initial sweep. She pulled out a final photograph, this one older, worn at the edges. "This was taken the day before I was kidnapped." It showed a young Emma at a birthday party, laughing at something off camera. But it wasn't Emma that made Grace's breath catch. It was the woman in the background, pushing a stroller. "That's my mother," Grace whispered. "And that's me in the stroller." Emma nodded. "Our mothers were friends once. Before my kidnapping destroyed my mother's ability to trust anyone. Before your mother's depression isolated her from the world. We played together as toddlers, Grace. In another life, we might have grown up as cousins, as family. We still can, Grace said impulsively. Family isn't just blood, it's choice. Max taught me that. Emma's composure finally cracked. I've been alone for so long. Even after escaping, I didn't know how to connect with people anymore. Trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Join the club, Sarah said dryly. We're all broken here. But maybe broken pieces can fit together in new ways. Harrison reached for Sarah's hand, and this time she let him take it. We have a chance here, not just to stop these people, but to reclaim what they stole from us. Emma, you're welcome in this family if you'll have us. Even though your mother was a victim too, Harrison said firmly. Grief and desperation make people do terrible things. But you're not responsible for her choices, any more than Grace is responsible for mine. Max barked once, tail wagging, and moved to sit in the center of their loose circle. The message was clear. Pack, family, together. All right, Emma said, wiping tears she'd probably deny later. Let's catch these bastards, all of them, and then... She looked around at these wounded people offering her belonging. Then, maybe we can all learn how to heal. As the FBI agents bustled around them, setting up surveillance equipment and planning the operation that would use Max as bait, Grace felt something she'd never experienced at Pine Ridge. Not safety, that was still too foreign. Not happiness, that would take time, but possibility. The chance that broken things could be mended, that families could be built from scratch, that even the most damaged hearts could learn to trust again. Max leaned into her, solid and warm and constant. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. All of them. The family that tragedy had torn apart and a dog's love had brought back together. 5 years had transformed the grounds of Pine Ridge from a place of hunger and despair into something unrecognizable, where peeling paint and broken windows once proclaimed society's indifference. Now stood the Harrison Family Center, a state-of-the-art facility that housed both orphaned children and rescued animals, built on the radical belief that healing happened best when the abandoned helped each other. Grace Thompson Harrison, 17 and poised despite her small stature, stood at the podium of MIT's freshman orientation, Max at her feet. Age had silvered his muzzle and slowed his gait, but his amber eyes remained sharp, still watching over her with the dedication that had saved them both. 5 years ago, I saved a dog, Grace began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable. Or maybe he saved me. The truth is, we saved each other. In the front row sat her family, a word that still sometimes caught in her throat with its sweetness. Sarah, 5 years sober and stable, wore the engagement ring on her left hand now, a quiet wedding having taken place in the garden of the center 2 years prior. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, replaced by something Grace had learned to recognize as peace. Harrison sat beside his wife, his wheelchair a concession to the heart condition that hadn't killed him as predicted. The doctors called it miraculous. Harrison called it stubbornness. Grace knew it was love, the fierce determination to see his daughter grow up that had kept him breathing through 2 heart surgeries and countless close calls. Emma Sullivan, Aunt Emma now, sat with them, her FBI badge tucked away, her hand holding that of a woman named Patricia she'd met during the trials. The kidnapping ring had fallen like dominoes once they'd used Max as bait, 23 arrests across 5 states. Dr. Mitchell was serving 15 years. Marcus Chen would never hurt another animal or child again. My father once told me he spent 60 years building an empire of technology, Grace continued, Max's tail thumping gently at the sound of her voice. But in his final days, what we thought were his final days, he learned what I knew at 12. The only technology that matters is love. The only program worth running is compassion. The only code worth writing is the one that brings families together. She looked down at Max, who, despite his arthritis, sat proud and alert. This is Max. He's worth more than the $50,000 his papers say. He's worth every hungry night that led me to him, every cold morning we shared in that broken shed, every moment he stood between me and harm. Her voice caught slightly. He's 12 now. The vet says we maybe have a year left together, but that year will be filled with the same love that carried us through the darkest times, because that's what family does. We stay. The audience was silent, moved by the simple truth of her words. Grace had been accepted to MIT not just for her grades, though studying with the best tutors Harrison's money could buy hadn't hurt, but for her essay about creating technology that could help identify at-risk children before they disappeared into the system. Some say money can't buy happiness, Grace said, finding Margaret in the middle rows. Her great-aunt had served 2 years, then been released to community service at the center. Redemption, Grace had learned, came in many forms. They're wrong. Money bought my father the heart surgeries that gave us 5 more years. It bought my mother the treatment that brought her back to us. It bought hundreds of children full bellies and warm beds. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. But first, a hungry girl had to choose love over $1 million. And an old dog had to remember a baby's scent after 12 years. Max stood then, slowly but with dignity, and walked to the edge of the stage. The audience held its breath as the elderly German shepherd surveyed them with those knowing eyes. So here's my challenge to you, Grace concluded. Build bridges, not walls. Create connections, not divisions. And remember, sometimes the most advanced technology has 4 legs and a wet nose. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous, but Grace only had eyes for her family as she made her way to them, Max moving carefully down the steps beside her. "Did I do okay?" she asked, the confident speaker becoming a daughter seeking approval. "Perfect," Harrison said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and the heart medication that kept him alive. "Your mother would be proud," Sarah said, then caught herself. "I mean, I am proud. I'm your mother. I'm here." "I know, Mom," Grace said gently. Sarah still sometimes forgot she'd survived, that she'd earned her place in her daughter's life. Later, at the celebration dinner, Grace slipped Max pieces of filet mignon under the table. Margaret caught her and raised an eyebrow, not the harsh judgment of before, but the fond exasperation of someone who'd learned that rules mattered less than love. "You know he's on a special diet," Margaret said. "It's his celebration too," Grace replied. "He deserves steak." Tommy, now 11 and thriving with his adoptive family, bounded over with Anna and 6 other kids from the center. "Grace, is it true Max is getting a statue?" "A small one," Grace confirmed. "By the fountain where kids and dogs can play around it." "Will it show him being a hero?" Anna asked. Grace looked at Max, who was now sprawled contentedly at her feet, occasionally accepting gentle pets from the children. "No. It'll show him doing what he does best. Being there, being loyal, being family." As the evening wound down, snow began to fall outside, the first of the season. Grace remembered another snowy day, 5 years past, when a dying dog had trusted a starving girl, when hope had seemed as distant as the stars. Now she sat surrounded by family, blood, chosen and found. The Harrison Family Center had reunited dozens of families, saved hundreds of animals, fed thousands of children. All because a girl had chosen compassion over cash. "You know what the best part is?" Grace told Max quietly as the party continued around them. "We did it together, every step." Max's tail thumped agreement, and Grace knew that whatever time they had left would be enough. because they'd already done the impossible. They'd turned tragedy into triumph, abandonment into abundance, loneliness into love. The fairy tale was real. It just had taken a starving girl and a dying dog to write it, and they weren't done yet. Dear friends, if Grace and Max's journey touched your heart, you understand that life's greatest treasures often come disguised as our deepest trials. Many of us at this stage of life carry regrets, relationships we let slip away, words left unspoken, chances we didn't take to show love when it mattered most. But Grace's story reminds us it's never too late for redemption. Like William Harrison, who found his daughter after 12 years, or Sarah, who climbed out of 7 years of silence, we all have the power to heal broken bonds. Maybe you're estranged from a child or sibling. Maybe you're the grandparent watching from afar, wondering if you'll ever hold that grandbaby. Or perhaps you're alone, believing your chance at family has passed. Max waited 12 years to complete his mission, bringing a shattered family together. His patience and faith teach us that love doesn't expire, that forgiveness can bloom even in winter's snow. What broken relationship in your life deserves a second chance? If you could make one phone call to bridge a gap torn by time and misunderstanding, who would you call? Please share your thoughts below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs today.